Hey, fellas, do either of you like to read military memoirs or military stories?
I do.
Yes.
What's the
I
last one
like
you
I
read?
like I like the ones well, I always enjoy like the coming up story,
Mm.
like the
Mm-hmm.
the background, how it's made.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, well, like David Goggins. So I mean, he's just one of those people that went from like got his whole life together, and then some would argue went too far into getting his life together. Like he's, yeah, I love stuff like that, just because I think that number one, I can identify with it, and two, it's sort of a usually an inspiring reminder to keep pushing yourself.
Yeah. Well, according to Forbes magazine, three literary giants said that military fiction and nonfiction titles will always have a place in a publisher's list and in the marketplace. Alex Shane of Writers House LLC said, quote, there is always going to be a market for military books by and about veterans. It's an evergreen market. We're never going to run out of readers who want to know more about what it's like to go to war. End quote. However, he goes on to say, the process of writing their story can help veterans make sense of their war experience. A lot of times, veterans write the book as a form of therapy and find it tremendously healing to get all of it out on paper. Joe, you went to a writing clinic. You're doing a
Mhm.
lot of writing now. Do you find this to be true?
Oh, absolutely. Not just in writing, even though I'm not writing my story, even writing a fiction novel that's just very loosely based off of someone that had similar experiences and way worse PTSD than I've yet had to deal with. Super cathartic. It's almost like tapping into a part of yourself that you haven't really explored, and so it help. I think it helps you deal with a lot of that stuff. And hearing someone else's perspective on that is always a quantifier. It's always something that helps you, sort of work through concepts, even if you haven't experienced them.
Hmm. Well, there you go, Alphas. Joe's going to take a minute to go work on his picture book. Until then, let's get this show started.
I like crayons.
This is the Tango Alpha Lima podcast.
They call me crazy cause I'm facing all my giants. They try to scare me into thinking I can fight it. They tell me I should never even think of trying. But that's just me, I'm gonna live out in defiance. Yeah, I think I like it.
welcome Alphas. Thanks for joining us. Our guest today is D. Paul Fleming. His book, A Date with Suicide, tells the stories of veterans who have struggled at the edge of life and death, including his own struggles as a disabled veteran, and walks readers down a path away from the date with suicide and toward an affirmation of life.
The one and only Paul Fleming.
Hey, Alphas. 30 days ago, US President Joe Biden pardoned thousands of veterans who, over the last 6 decades, were convicted of crimes under the UCMJ that banned gay sex. The proclamation will allow those affected to apply for a certificate of pardon to change their discharge status, which will help them receive withheld benefits. If the veteran status is changed, they will be eligible for veterans benefits that may have been previously denied. The American Legion issued a statement following the pardon saying, quote, this noble action is a monumental step forward, rectifying a grave injustice, affirming our nation's commitment to the principles of justice and equality for all who have sworn to protect our country with their lives, said Shanin Nuntavong, Executive Director of the American Legion's Government Affairs Office in Washington, D.C. The president's action not only corrects historic wrongs, but also strengthens the foundational principles of diversity and inclusion that are crucial to the strength and moral integrity of our armed forces and our country as a whole. End quote. The American Legion has been at the forefront of advocating for the rights and fair treatment of all veterans, including members of the LGBTQ community. The National Executive Committee affirmed that stance with the resolution number 10, Care for the Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender, Queer, or LGBTQ veteran community. That was adopted in May 2022. The resolution calls for all veterans to receive the VA care and benefits they have rightly earned. Listen, if you tuned in to season 5, episode 219 of the Tango Alpha Lima podcast, You will recall that retired Army General Tammy Smith talked about the need for such an edict, and we are proud that this time has finally come. If you fall into this category, please be sure to reach out to an accredited veteran service officer. Again, be sure it's an accredited veteran service officer from a trusted organization like the American Legion for support and guidance. And if you haven't listened to episode 219, please go back and listen to retired Army General Tammy Smith's interview with myself and Joe.
Okay, Alphas, please stick around. We'll be back with D. Paul Fleming right after the break.
Talking about suicide is hard, but the American Legion has joined forces with Columbia University to develop training for those who want to learn more about interacting and responding to veterans who may be in crisis. American Legion Be the One training. In the 90-minute class, you'll learn to understand the types of suicidal ideation and 4 behaviors that indicate imminent risk, how to use the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale to determine at-risk individuals, how to identify risk factors and warning signs, and how to communicate effectively with individuals who may be at risk of hurting themselves. Online and in-person sessions are available. Visit betheone.org/training to find a session. Learn the skills that'll give you the confidence to talk about suicide and be the one to save just one veteran.
All right, everybody. Today, we're joined by Navy veteran and author D. Paul Fleming. He says his friends call him Doug, so we're going to call him D. Paul Fleming. Welcome to the Tango Alpha Lima podcast.
Hey, I'm sorry. You dropped it to me, Joe, and I dropped the ball. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
So,
You
No,
must
we
not have been
love
much of
having
a. You must not have been much of a American Legion baseball player if you can't catch the ball when it's past.
I was horrible. Oh,
I was too
horrible.
smooth.
I was horrible.
What
Well,
position?
Doug, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today. You have a book out, Date with Suicide. It's such an important topic in our community, in the veteran community. The statistics are out there that show between 17 to 44 veterans a day take their life. The American Legion itself has made veteran suicide and mental health one of its top priorities through the Be the One campaign, which puts programming, resources, and messaging behind helping our community to be the one to make a difference. So we're excited to unpack some of your insights and lessons learned today. But before we jump too far in, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, your military career, and kind of what your journey has been like since leaving the service?
And what position you played?
In the Navy?
Navy and baseball and life now. We're asking all your life positions. Tell us everything that is you.
So at the age of 17, the Boston Red Sox wanted me because I was a superstar Legion baseball. No, that's all crap. No, I wasn't. I was a mediocre. I got my nickname because I was a pitcher in the years before American Legion. And I could fire the ball like, man, it was smoking hot. I could fire the ball. I had no control. So I used to hit everybody, all right? And I would leave these bright red marks on them. And they would say, you're flaming me here. You're flaming me. I ended up with the name The Flame, right?
Oh, that's a good nickname.
Right?
I like it.
Yeah. So, but check out the passage to my name in my yearbook. That'll really open your eyes.
Oh,
Anyway,
funny.
let's get back on track here. Joined the military at 17. I kind of knew I was going in the military at a young age, came from a broken home. I was on my own at age 14, worked full-time through high school, managed a letter in football and start my sophomore year and played through there. So I was a much better football player because I like to hit stuff than I was a baseball player. You know, I could fire the ball, but, you know, run it down every now and again. Joined the military. You know, I'm telling you, it was quite an experience for me. I had signed for 4 active, 2 reserve, and at the end of my first run, I had gotten hurt a couple times, and they sent me to VA. Ended up getting retired medically. Long road with the VA, as I'm sure you all know. So fast forward decades, you know, I suffered through the PTSD and all of that stuff that goes along with mental health. But I knew somewhere in the 90s, not long after I was discharged, that something was wrong. And I started seeking help from the private sector, trying to figure this thing out. And that's kind of how 10 years in the private sector, I ended up in the VA, trying to figure this thing out, and fought them for 18 months when they told me you got PTSD. And I finally said, fine, how do we fix it? And they say, you don't. I spent the next 18 months arguing with them on how we're going to fix this thing. And they didn't come up with any answers. So fast forward another decade or two. And in 2018, I made the decision. I said, listen, I've either got to end this pain, because this is just brutal, or I've got to find peace. So, I found peace, and I taught myself by using 1,000 pieces of information from any source that had come to me through roughly 4 decades, put myself back together, and now I'm telling my story. And the hardest thing for me to do is to tell the story. To the credit of the mental health professionals, they clamor at you. You got to tell your story. You don't have to tell somebody, just write it down. Write it to yourself, write a letter. And in my case, I kept hearing from a biblical source that I needed to become an author. And I kept telling the biblical source, that ain't happening. Okay. I barely got out of high school and you want me to write? That ain't happening. So long story short, the biblical side won, and here I am pumping out novels. Right. And the last piece I'll throw at you is, I've been a private guy. I kind of like my privacy. I don't like telling my story. But again, in a biblical sense, somebody said, you need to go tell your story. So here I am doing all the things I don't want to do. But the one thing that I do want to do is help veterans and save lives. So that outweighs all other fears, worries, concerns. And that's why I'm so blunt about my story.
That's exactly what I was going to reflect back, Doug, that I kind of heard you saying. And I think that a lot of the listeners can relate, because of our service background, is that it's not so much that it's self-seeking, self-promotion, glorification of ourselves, but, how can I package what I've been through? How can I tell, my story, and not just make it about me, but make it about the lessons learned and the information I've come to. And if that helps somebody else in some capacity, well, then that's my service-oriented mission. So I hear that coming through. I think Stacy's got a question for you.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with both you and Adam there about that same thing. It's, if you feel driven for something, there's got to be a reason behind it, and sometimes it's funny, because I've had that many times in my life where I think I'm supposed to be on one path, but it's really just a preamble to the next. And it sounds like, that's you as well. So anyway, Doug, I'm so glad you're here with us. And I want to say thank you for your service, and thank you for sharing a little bit about yourself. When I was getting ready to chat with you today, I'd like to go down rabbit holes and see what other things are out there. You once said that writing your story was cathartic. It opened something up, and that healing process, which you kind of mentioned when you were giving your backstory. And then you talked about how faith pushed you into telling your story. But you also mentioned something that really stuck with me too, which I think is important for the alphas to hear, is that no person should judge another person's trauma. That trauma belongs into the eyes of the ones who suffered it. That's your quote. That's a quote from you, which is the wisdom. Thank you for imparting. Can you share with me a little bit about what you mean by that, and how do you talk with people who have read, this is your second book, who've read your books, who come to you and say, oh, my trauma was nothing like yours, but XYZ, or my trauma doesn't compare to, let's say, Joe's an amputee, I'm a traumatic brain injury. I didn't lose a limb. I'm not as worse off as Joe. We do that within our community a lot. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you confront that within yourself and your readers?
Yeah, that's a great question, Stacy. And I'd like to thank you for calling me Doug, because the gentleman on this panel seemed to be calling me D. Paul. So I guess we're not friends yet, but go fly a helicopter, right?
We'll get there. Go
Okay.
fly a helicopter at it.
Only Adam's qualified.
So,
Oh, just
by the
just
way,
for
I
the
love your.
record, I called you Doug. It was Joe that called you DePaul.
Oh,
Do I have
okay.
no friends here?
It's like one of those rollerblades just smacked you upside the head there, Joe.
Hope that bus
Jeez.
feels good, Joe.
Oof.
So, listen, the first thing I can tell you is that my whole life I've used humor to outweigh the tragedies and the trauma, not only that I suffer, but that others have suffered. To me, laughter and telling the story are hand in glove. A part of me wants to cry just having this conversation right now, not in a bad way, because it's so emotionally uplifting. The darkness loves to find despair, right? So the more you despair, the more you're troubled, the more darkness finds you and just keeps weighing. So to go back to, the profound statement by D. Paul Fleming on trauma, I think it seems to be a bit more controversial than I'd like it to be, but my belief, and I mean my staunch belief, is that each person's trauma can only be weighed by that person. I can't judge, nor am I qualified, nor will I ever be qualified to comprehend your trauma on your level. For me, going to boot camp was a piece of cake. But if you read my first book, in the last chapter, you'll understand why. Because at the age of 14, I was, hand in glove with life and death. So getting yelled at, having people scream at you, man, that was a cakewalk. But I watched other people in boot camp, all but pee themselves because they're getting screamed at. They couldn't understand it. They couldn't handle it. And if you got up in their space, man, they just didn't know what to do. And in boot camp, we had one guy, tough kid, right? Tough kid. And in my book, A Date with Suicide, I use that as an example. This kid in boot camp broke his bic apart and tried to kill himself, right? In boot camp. And I'm like, I was mad. And I didn't resolve that until I sat down and wrote this latest book. And I drew back and I said, yeah, I was pretty ticked off at this guy for interrupting my 4 hours of sleep. So I had to deal with it, so that, looking in hindsight, that's kind of where I didn't trust or believe in other people's trauma. Now and over time, of course, I do. And if you look at especially women, right? How can a man equate to a woman's trauma and 36,000 reports from the DOD of sexual trauma? I can't comprehend it. So all I can do is empathize and appreciate, what they're saying, and trust that the level of trauma that they feel from whatever they're dealing with is truly what their conflict is internally. Their four beings are battling over that trauma. And to us, it may seem, relatively simple, but to others, it isn't. Now, let me close that loop with this. And I mean this very respectfully, Joe. When somebody loses a piece, an arm, a leg, something, you can look at them and you can kind of say, oh, I can see they went through trauma. But on mental health, we as a nation haven't even come close to getting our head around how difficult mental trauma is, because so few understand that it affects the four bodies of our existence: your physical, your mental, your spiritual, and your emotional bodies. Doctors don't attack it from that directions, but from the cloth that I wear, I do. Sorry for taking so long.
No, I mean, I think that was very insightful, and I couldn't agree with you more with what you said. That's why I wanted to bring it up. So thank you for that, Doug.
And
I on my quotes, man. I got to be careful.
Oh no! Hey, feel free to pipe in. I mean, the whole point is this conversational mindset of being able to be open with each other. And just so you know, I've been voted most likely to cry. So I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad that you're open to feeling emotion, because for me, I love it. I love emotion. I mean, it's the number one thing that reminds me that I'm here, and that I'm a human being, and that I have an identity as a separate thing. And that's what separates us from animals, is that drive and that push. And you've talked about some of the struggles that you've went through, and you talked, of course, about the physical side of what I went through. Exactly like you said, was the easiest part. 11 days before I got hurt, I lost most of my second squad to a suicide bomber, and that is what I dealt with in the hospital emotionally. When I got hurt, I thought I was dead. And I'm optimistic. It just was a logical conclusion I came to. So when I got to the other side of that, mentally, I kind of had already accepted my injury in a lot of ways. If you go from being dead to all of a sudden steps and hills are a bit of a problem, like that's a fair trade. I'm okay with that. But it all sort of nails down into resilience. And I think resilience is a mindset muscle. It takes a lot of work to make it strong, but making that choice over and over again makes it easier. And it's a weird feeling when you realize something that you've had to work on so hard for yourself is something that other people need to see, because all of a sudden you have to give yourself credit for being like, I have done something that I think can help other people. And that's a hard thing to do. It feels like such a personal journey. It feels egotistical to tell other people what worked for you. I don't feel like, I'm no better than anyone else. So for me, it feels so uncomfortable when someone compliments me on my attitude. So one of the hardest things I had to learn how to do was take a compliment without undermining myself or making light of it. And I started that by not letting other people do that as well. I don't let people mistreat my friends around me. And you, Doug, are the same way. I won't allow someone to mistreat themselves. And so I'm saying all this because I realized I was doing harm to myself and blocking other people from sending me those positive feelings and love. And I realized that people are entitled to sharing their love, and I don't want to be a barrier to that. So instead of denying it, I tried to work on feeling worthy of it. And I pushed ego out of the way. And then I had kids and I went too far with no ego because it's, there's nothing more humbling than children. But weirdly enough, being able to accept compliments made it easier for me to see where I fell short in a healthier way. And that self-honesty has turned into an asset I didn't know I needed. So now I rambled, but I wanted to sort of set that up because I wanted to say, how do we show love to these warriors in a way that they can accept? How can we leverage that desire to help them into setting them up for success, whether it's getting them signed up for the VA, sometimes, like you mentioned in one of your interviews I watched, against their will. Sometimes you just got to do it to them to help them, or other VSOs like the American Legion. Like, how do we give these people that sense of community that you lose when you get out of the military? How do we do this in a way that doesn't push them away instead?
Yeah, so a lot of great points in there, Joe.
Too many, some would say.
Well, it's going to take about an hour and a half for me to answer, but it's all good. Right?
Sorry, Adam and Stacy.
So the compliments, let me hit that one first. For me, it's been a challenge to accept compliments, right? So one of the things someone a heck of a lot smarter than me said to me at one point was, you do realize that when you downplay somebody's compliment, you're insulting them, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Draw back and say, yikes. Right. That's so true. Because if I were to offer somebody a compliment, where's it coming from? It's coming from my heart. Right. Okay. So I had to think about it and say, all right, so now what do I do? Because I don't want to do this to people, but I'm not comfortable getting complimented. And the guy said, look, suck it up and just accept it. All right. You've earned it. And that took time to kind of let it absorb so that I can accept compliments, i.e. Both books that I've written. People have come to me and said, your book saved my life. A shipmate called me up out of the blue, 30 years. Went and had wings, and 5 minutes into the conversation, he said, great book. Sorry you went through that. Just got to tell you that reading your book stopped me from committing suicide. And again, how do you respond to that level of compliment, right? So it's for all of us, it's a piece in progress. It's something that we've got to keep building on. I've taken steps and realized that all the stuff that I've written and said really is more of a conduit, passing these things along, and my experiences are nothing more than telling my story, right? If others see that as complimentary, then I need to accept that, because I can see where it's helping others by telling my story.
Yeah.
As to how, Joe, how, right? So Donald Dunn did 20 in the Army. I'm connecting with him this weekend in his group Hero Stock. He wrote one of the best books I've ever read. I don't have it in front of me, but it's this thick, and it is 3-4 pages long per chapter. And he tells his story from pre-enlistment to current. And he did it in such a simple matter of fact that I'm stunned at how he just walked his way through having a conversation and put it in writing. And now it's helping everybody, including me. So what is his message? Well, his message is we need to listen, not just to each other, but we need the civilian community to do two things. One, listen to us without talking. Okay. Most veterans that are willing to talk or want to talk don't want you to respond. Okay. Listen, if you want to tell the story about how you lost your leg, listen, I'll listen, but I ain't going to ask you. Right. Now to me, that's veterans. Civilians say, oh my God, right? Joey Jones, he's got no legs. What happened? They need to know. Again, not to get long-winded, but when civilians see something that traumatizes their eyes, they have to know. And they come forward to try and touch you like they're helping, right? Well, they're not. So we need the civilian community to just treat us like everybody else, and except for listen, and don't give us feedback. We're not looking for your feedback. We're just trying to tell you something. And then that's it. No more. All right. You look at most vets, we go somewhere and the guy says, my wife is divorcing me. Men don't tend to ask why. It's a statement, right? We'll try to use that as an example. Okay. Civilians need to just listen. Now, here's the big part of that. Everybody's going around post 9/11 saying thank you for your service. Great phrase. Well, what's the phrase that needs to follow on? How's your mental health? I'm here. I'm listening. Are you suicidal? Do you know anybody that killed themselves? What's the next tagline? We need to do the post 9/11, thank you for your service. And we need that next piece that says the same thing. Thank you for your service. How's your mental health? Right? I need help. We need the veteran community. We need the civilian community to come up with that next catchphrase so that the whole world starts talking about mental health in the same line as thank you for your service.
Wow. Thank you so much for being open and being able to talk about this in the way that you do. I can see your resilience bleeding through, and there are some people that their mindset is like, you talk about absorbing, sometimes you can take people's negativity with you, and if you've got healthy ways of getting rid of that, it makes you very popular with other people. So thank you. I appreciate you.
I've got healthy ways of removing negativity and darkness. As a seasoned holy man, the phrase was coined by Granddaughter Crow out on the Navajo land. But yeah, it's a key part of what I do. I don't publicly say a lot about it, but getting darkness out of people, like you were saying, Joe, where you're ready to cry. Okay. It's clear to me that all those blocks that were tied up in knots in your gut, okay, when you resolve those things, it gave your emotions a place to be able to move, okay? And it lets so much more flow through you. When you're dealing with negativity, your entire existence is caked in darkness, okay? In whatever way you want to see the word darkness, okay? You can look at it biblically, you can look at it spiritually, you can look at it as just people being unfriendly, right? But that cloud that hangs around us, we have to learn to get rid of that, because it's a critical step in letting the four corners of your existence, your physical, your mental, your spiritual, and your emotional bodies all work together so that you're grounded, balanced, and able to move forward in a healthy way. again, I don't mean to be too tall on that soapbox, but
No,
kind of
no, that's great.
something
And
that I'm pretty passionate on.
well, your passion's certainly coming through, and you hit on something that I kind of wanted to highlight as well, and bring it back to the book a little bit. So your book addresses the four corners of existence, like you said: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, and their impact that it has on the individual and the veterans' lives. And you're also talking a little bit about your Native American history and culture, and we were talking a little bit about, the show beforehand. I had the opportunity to co-host an event with spiritual leaders, Indigenous Native American spiritual leaders in 2022. And it was a 3-day arduous, event, very physical event. And in doing so, and in preparation leading up to that event, I learned about the Native American medicine wheel and the four components of it. And there's a physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. It's a north, south, east, west. It's a red and yellow, black and white. And it was so interesting to me how simple it is, but how many layers to the circle and how complex it is. So with that being said, and looking at these four corners of existence as it pertains to what do you recommend a listener or a veteran can do to begin to tackle these dimensions in their own lives, for their care?
Yeah, that event sounds pretty amazing. I hope you connect me with that. Plug me into some of those people. I love them. I'm very passionate about that stuff. Anyway, so in my book, I don't just leave you hanging in the end where I start walking through the four corners of your existence. I kind of help you with the focus of the book being on what happened to me and why. So the book, A Date with Suicide, focuses on 4 pieces and 2 questions: what happened to me and why. And if you look around the veterans and ask them, my son-in-law, when he came home, man, good Lord, his mouth couldn't stop saying, what the hell happened to me? Why didn't they tell me this? Why? Right? Not in a bad way. So many veterans are going through the same thing. And it kind of made me draw back and say, well, I've been asking the same questions. What happened to me and why? For me, between my childhood and all the trauma of life, right? All the crap we got to deal with, good and bad. I couldn't find my way back to my spirit world, to God, and I was angry, and then I wasn't angry, and I wasn't blaming somebody else, because I never really did, and I never complained about my injuries, and I never have, right? But I knew something wasn't right. So I eventually, when I said, I've either got to finish the suicide thing or I got to find peace, because this sucks. And I found peace, but in doing so, I needed a starting point. Everybody has to have a starting point, and there's no way to tell somebody else what is that starting point. So I like to say, look, what happened in your first day of boot camp, right? What's the first thing you remember from boot camp? Is it standing on the 2 yellow pads? Okay. Well, that was your starting point for boot camp or the transition. Same thing. Find a starting point. For me, it was I needed to reconnect with God, and I needed to do it in a fashion that I knew was far afield from the everyday person. So I re-engaged with my Catholic faith, and I deeply re-engaged with my Native Americanism. And I dove in head first and spent 8 years doing nothing but focusing on that. And that was kind of my starting point. But in that journey, I realized, just like you with the medicine wheel, right? Life's a circle. Okay. And then so I identified all my parts, went back to basics, learned to ground, learned to open up, and without getting deeply into the spiritual connections, I realized that my emotional being was so clogged, it was so packed with crap, that there was no way I was going to be able to experience love and joy outside of my wife. So for me, I had to find a starting point, which was my reconnection with my faith. And then from there, I kind of whittled around on my mental pain and got off all the VA mental drugs and found another way to deal with that. Okay, and everybody buckle up, because I am not a big time meditation guy. VA wanted me to meditate for decades, and I told them, get out of here. I'm not a meditation guy. Buckle up. When I decided that I have to find peace, I finally said, fine, what's this meditation crap about? I put my head back, listened to my Native American drumming, and the next thing I knew, I was meditating. In through the nose, out through the mouth, no kumbaya, just quiet, right? And for a split second, my anxiety disappeared. 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5 seconds. And then that burning nastiness that was in my gut that disappeared came roaring back with authority. But my world changed. This meditation stuff, this thing works, right? Well, what is meditation? The whole project is to quiet your mind. Okay. And if you can quiet your mind, you can reboot it just like a computer, period, full stop. So when I talk to veterans about starting points, I say to them that 5 minutes where I surrendered to the kumbaya gods and said, okay, I'm going to close my eyes and focus on my breathing. And that was it. In through my nose, out through my mouth. And I found a moment's peace. And for me, that was enough. That was my starting point.
Oh, Doug, I love that. What happened and why? Because you're going and find a starting point, right? So you're making it very practical and starting to do what? Ask questions, which is allowing yourself to reframe, to process. And, for us military folk, it's hard to be still. We were programmed to do the opposite. That program started in basic training. It was for a very specific need. It was for our MOS. It was for our wartime mission. And the military does a great job at programming us to be great soldiers and sailors and airmen. And then when we get out, we have that programming, and then we try to plug back into society with an inability to quiet our mind. And we say, hold on, man, I'm struggling. I'm having challenges. And not only that, then you go against the culture of even being to elevate, that you're not doing okay and having to overcome that. And so from a scientific standpoint, what we can see is that when we're able to develop these tools and these skill sets to be able to get to our subconscious programming, and then when we tap into it, being able to ask these questions, what happened? Why? How do I feel about it? What am I going to do about it? Start to envision ourselves in a better future, a different future. Then we're disrupting the sequence of thoughts, choices, actions, experiences, feelings, starting to disrupt that until we have a new programming going forward. So it's so powerful, and it's really hard when you're saying, well, how am I going to stay still? How am I going to focus on my breath? How am I going to, do these things? And sometimes it just has to be that burning desire inside of you to say, well, I can't continue to exist in the state that I'm in. So am I willing to commit myself to really trying to dig into these practices so that I can achieve some new desired better state, so I can achieve that peace within and step into purpose. So thank you for that, Doug. Practical and very sound.
Mm-hmm. So Doug, I want to switch gears because this is your second book, A Date with Suicide. And I wanted to see what readers who've read it, how they've responded to it. So I took to Amazon. And so all you alphas out there who are thinking about going and getting this book, let me just share with you a couple of the comments that I read. One person said, as a psychiatric nurse, I was absorbed in this book. The writer explains what I've wanted to know for years. What really happened to our veterans. They came back and none wanted to speak about it. This is exciting. This read, it tells all. She gave you 5 stars, by the way. Another said, one thing I could tell when reading this book was how heartfelt Fleming is about stopping veteran suicide. His passion shines through every sentence. This is the type of book I would normally read, but if you or a loved one or anyone you know has a veteran in their life, I highly recommend this book. I believe there is help inside these pages for anyone going through this kind of trauma. She also gave you a 5-star. There was a number of other ones, Alpha. So if you want, go on to Amazon and see what else people are saying about this book. I've placed my order. I hope you will too. Now, I have a couple of questions for you as a follow-on. One, what's your favorite book? And 2, what are you reading right now?
So right now I'm reading Don's book. I'm also reading Oh crap, I can't remember her name. Sorry about this. I'm drawing a blank. Another girl that wrote a book on suicide ideation. And I apologize, I'm drawing a blank on her name, but she comes at it from more of a spiritual viewpoint. Okay, but it's got some great bits of information in it that's very helpful. So right now I'm trying to read, my focus is trying to read as many veteran books as I can. A couple of guys are getting together to kind of organize a book tour of veterans authors. A woman veteran, Donna, oh man, I'm drawing a blank on names. Donna, I read her book recently. I've been promoting that because it's a good story from female veterans point of view. Anyway, and I apologize, Stacy. The first part of that question was?
Oh no, I was asking what you're currently reading and what your favorite book is.
Oh, well, my favorite book. My favorite book is a book by Tom Clancy. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Tom Clancy.
I have no idea. Never heard of that guy before.
So I'm going to have to
Tommy?
help you out because he wrote a book called The Hunt for Red October. Okay. And if any of you've seen that movie, The Hunt for Red October, I actually read that book while I was serving on board. You ready for this? The USS Dallas SSN 700, the actual Red October, or the actual book in the boat in the movie. And
wow,
that's the USS Dallas doing emergency blow. So I don't care whatever carnival rides you've ever gone to, you've never experienced something until you've done a deep dive blow from from pretty deep underwater, right? On a nice 45 plus degree angle. So that's probably my favorite book. But I really wasn't a big time reader until, the last number of years. I couldn't read to save my life through most of my adult life. And then one day I had to sit down and figure it out. So reading was always a challenge for me.
You've got a really very rich voice. Have you ever thought about converting your two books into audiobooks?
Yeah, so I'm getting approached more and more with that. But so I'm open to it. I've had podcast offers from folks. Apparently my mouthful of gravel seems to resonate with some people, but I'll sing for you guys, but you'll be putting pencils in your ears, so
I'm a narrator and you've got a good voice for it. People like having a little bit of gravitas.
Yo, Adrienne. Hey.
There you go. I think you got some competition there, Joe. Doug's gonna.
I'm okay. I wouldn't mind losing to Doug. He'll go back to DePaul if he beats me, though.
Well, listen. Once I'm famous, it is Mr. DePaul, right? Mr. DePaul,
best-selling author and narrator, DePaul.
Right? Yeah.
So, speaking on what you said earlier on why, that's really interesting to me because I hate when people ask questions that they don't want to know the answer to. And when I say they don't want to know the answer to, I don't just mean they don't want to hear it. I mean, they're not willing to search. They're not willing to look inside themselves for that answer. So for instance, if you're on your sixth marriage, if you are continuously getting in trouble for the same things, at some point you've got to stop and go, Joe might have a little something to do with this. But going into the military, I think, is for many a journey towards a purpose, a why. And so we tend to hinge ourselves on what seems to work. And so, there's found purpose that touches upon real purpose. So for instance, you go into the military, and for me, I went in as a corpsman. I was a field medic for Marines, and it was found purpose because helping people, it scratched that itch, but I didn't know what the actual purpose behind it was. I didn't realize that I was a caregiver. I wanted to take care of people. And for me, it wasn't important that it was physical. It could be emotional. It could be, I'm a morale guy. And that's how I've always, when I deployed, I was always the guy that was trying to keep people happy and keep people up, because happy people sleep better. Happy people fight better. And so we find ourselves, we hinge ourselves to this door of purpose. And then when it's over and the door swings back open, we're banging against the house in the wind, searching for stability again. And I call that my door metaphor, and I just made it up. But Two things. One, you can't spoil getting better by having a rough day or slipping up. Once you've found that starting point, you're on a journey that you can be better at the end of. And based on your experiences, what advice would you give to veterans who are currently struggling in that path, heading back into the civilian world? Are there specific strategies or resources that you personally found helpful? So all that rambling again is for me to say, you can't spoil getting better by having a rough day or a slip up. Once you've found that starting point, you're on a journey towards getting better. So based on your experiences, what advice would you give to veterans who are currently struggling to find that path, that why, and that purpose once they're out of the military and heading back into the civilian world?
Yeah. Again, I got to go back to, you got to find a starting point, and then you just have to accept that you're going to be in for a transitional tough time. Okay. Because, people keep saying you got to transition back into the civilian world. And I don't think it's working, guys. We keep saying you gotta listen. No, this is what we are, and this is who we are. And I think what we need to do is we need to shift this thing around and say, no. I need to accept what the civilian world is and who I am. Okay. And stop trying to butt heads with the civilian world. Cause listen, I'm married to a civilian and I still don't get her. And we've been together, as I like to say, for 50 years. Right. But no person knows me better than my wife. And she's never been in the military. So again, when we try to understand each other too much, we're like this, right? A 100% Irish Catholic woman, right? These are tough broads. Okay. I'm telling you. So when you butt heads with a civilian, you get nowhere. So we'll use my wife as an example. When we say, listen, let's just accept the things that we don't understand about each other and move on. And it's like a revelation. It's easy, right? So I think we need to do the same thing in the civilian community, is stop trying to be a civilian or stop trying to be like civilians and just be us, but realize that we have to tone it down when we're dealing with civilians. And when we're dealing with non-civilians, we can tone it back up, right? Because there's nothing that scares a civilian more than when you go, rah, 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 right? To a veteran, they're like, dude, get out of my face, okay? Anyway, that's where I'm going with. I think that some of the things that we've been hammering on forever, generationally, we need to shift, especially with what we are trying to transition back into the civilian world. We are veterans, and that's who we are. It's a distinct demographic. We just happen to be in the civilian environment.
You rock. I appreciate you so much, brother.
Agreed. So as we wrap up our chat, Doug, is there anything that we haven't covered that you think the alphas out here who are listening should know?
Yeah. The reason I wrote my first book, 2,442 Steps to Crazy. This is the book that gave me the confidence to tell the story or start telling the story of my time in the military. A Date with Suicide is the first of what will most likely be a 10-book series, each time covering 4 topics. The next topic we'll start out with is going to be anger, right? Our go-to emotion. And the way we're going to talk about that in the next book is I'm going to say, if you identify with any emotion, what is it? Okay. And when veterans kind of look at it and they go, well, I don't know. I say, okay, let me ask you this. You're in crisis mode and something's going on. What emotion's coming up? Anger, right? Because anger masks all else. It masks your physical pain, your mental pain, your spiritual pain, and your emotional pain. And from the second you enter the military, that's what you're taught. Anger, right? If you're going to go kill somebody, you're not going to do it skipping, and playing hopscotch, right? You're going to do it from a position of anger. What level of anger doesn't matter. It's already ingrained into you. So for me to get there, I had to go back and do what I didn't want to do, and that's tell the story about my childhood. A VA mental health counselor who I put in the forward with a huge thank you. Okay. She put a review on Amazon on 2,442 Steps to Crazy, where she, as a mental health professional, thanked me for telling the story of my pre-military life, because she has been battling for decades to get veterans to talk about their pre-military life, because that's the baggage that you brought into the military. If you had trust issues prior to joining and you had success in the military and good trust, you're confused when you get out. If you didn't have trust issues before the military and you got screwed in the military, i.e., 36,000 reports of sexual trauma from last DOD report, you lose your trust, and now you're trying to get back into the civilian community. So telling the story about my childhood, and again, if I'd have changed the title and said this is a fiction, a horror fiction, it would have probably been a New York Times bestseller. But it's an amazing read that has helped a ton of veterans understand why their anger is at such an extreme level. Their childhood, their upbringing, the military, and now they're dumped into the civilian community. Okay. The anger is the biggest, most dangerous weapon that we have. And it is the number one feeling that we must combat.
Thanks for sharing that.
Wow.
And looking forward to these other books. Where can our alphas find you? Do you have a website?
Yeah, so dpaulfleming.com. I'm actually meeting with another fellow vet this weekend who's he's gonna do a real fancy website for me, but pretty basic, and I like it. But dpaulfleming.com. You can catch me on Twitter on the same handle, dpaulfleming. Wait a minute, is it dpaulfleming on Twitter? I've got two Twitter handles. One's apolitical, so if you want to look at it from just mental health discussion, that's the place. If you go to Veterans Wellness, yeah, we get pretty excited over there in the veteran wellness space. I'm also on Facebook. I'm on some of the other ones, but those are the ones that I focus on: Twitter and Facebook. And if you ever need somebody to talk to, if you need somebody to have a cup of coffee, if you need someone to listen, I'm your guy. I stole Dr. Fraser Crane's monologue by saying, "I'm listening."
Well, I appreciate that so much, Doug. Thanks for visiting us today. Thank you for your continued service, your journey, and for helping to tell your story to help so many others. It's much needed, and it's inspiring to me as well, just like I'm sure it will be for our listeners. All right, Alphas, stick around for some scuttlebutt after the break.
The American Legion is raising awareness about PTSD and veteran suicide by offering hope, camaraderie, and support.
Be the one to help end veteran suicide.
Be the one to save one veteran.
Be the one to ask a veteran in your life how they're doing.
Be the one to reach out when a veteran is struggling.
Go to betheone.org and help the American Legion end veteran suicide.
Will you be the one?
Okay, Alphas, we hope you had a great break. Now it's time for some scuttle booty.
Nice.
Oh, not you, Adam. Oh,
Yes.
man. We gotta get up with
I know Joe loves scuttle booty so much.
I'm a bad influence.
Good Lord. Okay. Well, the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs announced $10 million in new funding for eligible states, territories, and tribal governments through cooperative agreements to better inform veteran suicide prevention strategies. These cooperative agreements will provide funding and technical assistance intended to establish, coordinate, manage suicide mortality review committees, which identify and characterize suicide deaths. Suicide mortality review committees help establish a local understanding of suicide, identify populations or locations of special concern, and inform the development and implementation of data-informed suicide prevention strategies for veterans. Okay, you guys, the reason why I wanted to share this was, first, I'm glad that they're investing in veterans' mental health, but I also have to say that I'm scratching my head here. They're going to spend $10 million to establish committees to figure out who is susceptible to suicide, why, where, and whatever else. If I had $10 million, I would invest in perhaps getting veterans off the street, creating tiny home villages, curbing homelessness, some of the things that, are triggers for veterans in taking mental health dives. You know what I mean? I mean, I have been on the struggle bus. I live it. So if I had $10 million, I would invest it in grassroots nonprofits who are slugging it out in their communities through art therapy, Outward Bound, alternative drug therapies, the litany of things that people are already out there doing great things. They are on the tip of the spear. They know what's going on. I don't know if we need committees to talk about who's at risk. We know who's at risk. So if they want to spend $10 million, perhaps we reevaluate the staff, cleave the folks who don't care about our veterans, and then, from within, invest in the staff that do. So as you guys know, I'm a big fan of Reddit. I love to see what people are saying out there on the interwebs. And they did not disappoint. I'm just going to share a couple of them. First of all, Zach in STL, which I'm assuming in Seattle, Zach
St.
in Seattle
Louis?
said, or St. Louis. Yeah, that could be it. We'll see. Zach,
Either
here
Stolen
Seattle or
Liger.
St. Louis.
He
So
could have
Zach said-
stolen a Liger.
Yes.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay. Zach said, I barely trust the VA. I hear you, Zach. I mean, the last time I went to the VA hospital in Greenville, South Carolina, yes, Greenville, we're talking to you. They gave me a plastic cup to pee in for my urine labs and then had me pour out my own urine into a test vial. So apparently normal specimen cups are way too expensive and they don't care if I get my own urine all over my hands because it washes off or whatever. So I complained to the patient advocate and he informed me that he was told that this was not only acceptable, but was the current standard procedure. VA, come on now. So VA, maybe you should look at spending maybe $10 million in sample cups for veterans so they don't have to be humiliated and demoralized during medical care visits. Just a thought. Also, at Ronson, Ronson, said, the VA told me I had to wait 3 weeks to see someone when I told them I am having occasional thoughts of suicide. If you are not scratching your head right now, guys, there's something wrong, something seriously wrong. Hey, VA, maybe spending $10 million on expanding mental health care staff might be wise. So if you see people who are in distress right now, they're saying, I have thoughts of suicide. Don't wait 3 weeks. 3 weeks from now, they may not be here to tell that story. Spend some money, expand your staff. If we want to improve and fight against veteran suicide, these are just my thoughts. I'm on a soapbox, guys. What are your thoughts?
I have a million. I'm gonna let Adam go
yeah.
though because I went off on the last one.
No, we talk about this all the time, and I think, with that $10 million, maybe they could invest in some stability in positions at respective locations. Because yes, there's like 3 weeks to wait to somebody when you're in an urgent situation, and then there's, the other side of that is like going in and seeing a different provider and having to retell your entire story every time. And so if you could minimize and eliminate that, so if that 10 million, it could be invested into setting up a committee to say, hey, how can we ensure that there's continuity of care, throughout, and that once these thresholds of, levels of urgency are met that somebody has, that we have the, appropriate staff and avenues to be able to reach those folks. I think that ultimately goes back to the veteran's experience, right? So from a technology standpoint, it's the user experience. What the users are saying is we're having a bad experience. It's incumbent upon the provider of those services to understand why that experience is bad and start to seek ways to improve it. I think that $10 million could be used for that.
My question is, how does 10 million, what is the cost? Are you paying these people $10 million? Where does the $10 million go? Because in my mind, you could take 2 million of that and you could build 10 tiny homes with 2 veterans in it each that would take care of each other and use the other 800K to make it a self-sustaining community of sorts, and work to spend some of that to help them get jobs. And these communities, when you put veterans together like that, they improve one another. They rely upon one another. We've seen it time and time again. We've talked about some of those stories. This stuff just drives me crazy. How do you spend $10 million on a committee? Isn't that just people that want to help? How does that cost $10 million?
Yeah, I know that $10 million sounds like a lot. In the grand scheme of things, in medical ways, it's not.
Mhm.
But I just think there's better ways to spend $10 million than to gather some people together to talk about what they need to talk about. The time for talking is over. The time for action is now. That's just what I'm thinking. All right.
Well said, Stacey.
So, Marine Corps veteran Jeremy Williams was humiliated last summer when his front 6 teeth fell out of his mouth in the middle of a business meeting. Almost a year later, he's infuriated that he still can't get his Veterans Affairs health insurance to correct the problem. Williams' dental problems stem from an injury he suffered in 2006 during a roadside bomb attack in Ramadi, Iraq. The blast threw him face first into his weapon mount, cracking the upper bones in his mouth. But despite what would seem to be an obvious service-connected injury, Williams has spent most of the last 22 years adrift in the VA healthcare system, forking over tens of thousands of dollars in his own money to cover an array of dental problems stemming from that injury. For the last 10 months, he's been trying to figure out how to get the VA to pay for surgery to put his front teeth back into his mouth. He's quoted as saying, "It's so frustrating because if I was missing a limb from war, I know I'd be able to get a prosthetic right away," he said. "VA is good at that, but dental stuff doesn't work that way." End quote. Advocates say these shortcomings in VA dental coverage are a common complaint among veterans, both with those that have minor and serious injuries. So VA leaders say that they're working to improve the system and have added hundreds of dental workers in the last year. But officials also anticipate hundreds of thousands more individuals will be added to the dental care programs over the next few years, thanks to recent changes in VA health care eligibility rules, including the one that we just spoke about, Stacey. So whether the staff additions will be enough to keep up with demand and address ongoing shortfalls in the system remains unclear. But if we're looking at historical data, it seems doubtful. I think that it's only going to get more complicated. As of right now, the primary complaints regarding VA dental care usually focus on eligibility or accessibility. Generally, to be eligible for department dental coverage, veterans must have a service-connected disability specifically related to their teeth or mouth, or be rated 100% disabled because of other service injuries. It's awful that his fastest avenue towards getting dental care for an injury that was sustained in a combat scenario directly due to combat actions from the enemy is to get service connected 100%. That's really the fastest way for him to get dental care. But poor dental health can lead to larger problems in those with other medical issues and vice versa. So, veterans ourselves are particularly vulnerable to dental problems because of battlefield injuries, mental health difficulties, toxic exposure. So, and these difficulties are all too familiar to Williams, who said his overall health has been significantly hurt by his dental problems, and that makes sense. That's every aspect of your life, between eating to self-care. But after being medically retired from service following his injuries in Iraq, the VA provided care for Williams' traumatic brain injury, muscular damage, and other assorted health issues. But save for an initial cursory dental appointment, his oral issues went unaddressed for almost 10 years when he bit into a piece of chicken that left several teeth behind. With extremely long wait times for a VA dentist, Williams was forced to go to a private dentist and pay more than $12,000 for a fix he thought would be permanent. But when his teeth fell out last summer, he once again faced the decision between finding a VA dentist who's available or paying out of pocket for the procedure. He spent the last year managing his pain and not smiling. There are grand and modest plans to address the need for improved dental care that have been introduced in Congress, but none have gone very far. But with or without legislation, the PACT Act has made it easier for many veterans to push their disability rating to 100%, thus making them eligible for dental care and creating a wave of new patients for the already strained VA dental staff. Williams, meanwhile, continues to wait. At this point, I don't care if it takes another 10 years to fix it. Uncle Sam is going to pay for my new teeth. I wish every person who hears this podcast would call and make sure this gets done. Yeah. Make it more annoying to neglect this guy than it is to fix it.
My question is, how can you ignore that? You literally have to eat to survive. And so the VA is saying, like, if you're missing teeth, That's a problem. How is it that somebody has a service-connected disability and they are
Yeah.
not being taken care of? You want to spend
Exactly.
$10 million on committees and not spend a couple thousand, a few thousand. Hey, spend all $10 million. Get this guy's teeth fixed. Jesus.
So that's the part that doesn't. So it is service connected because he was in the blast, right? In
Yeah.
2006.
Yeah.
So it is being recognized that he just can't get access. It's not that they're
What
not
about
recognizing this, right?
I
So
guess
it's
that doesn't sound like.
recognized. He has
Oh.
service connected because of that, and he's still having these.
And
And
he's
he's
100%
100% rated.
So it's about the dental staff being overwhelmed, maybe?
And,
So
and
what
they
about
hired a hu-
community
100
care?
That's
Community
crazy.
care.
How do you, I mean, the point is we can talk all day, but results are the only thing that matters.
Right.
And, you know, our government, when in the VA, when they're owed money, they get it. When you're overpaid, they get their money back. So why can this level of getting it done why can't this happen with this gentleman? Like this guy, if somebody in his situation can't survive living the way that they have to live, that goes on somebody's shoulders. That's on somebody's hands. And I don't know this guy. He may have a great attitude, but that can't make things easier. I can't imagine what it would be like if I wasn't pretty. Sorry.
I guess we'll never know. We'll never know, Joe.
Adam.
You're funny. It makes me wonder if there are any organizations out there that he can turn to for implants, like dental implants. Hey, alphas, if you know of an organization or a dentistry that does implants that would be willing to help this veteran who's obviously very worthy and has been waiting a long time unnecessarily, if you can help him, if you know anybody, please drop us a line and we will pass it on to him.
All right. Well, speaking of benefits, the next deadline for backdated PACT Act payments is coming soon. So here's what you need to know. The clock is counting down to the final deadline for certain U.S. military veterans or their surviving family members to receive maximum benefits for a toxic exposure-related medical condition under the PACT Act. Those vets or family members who hadn't yet filed a PACT Act claim, but instead declared their intent to file ahead of the summer 2023 deadline, locked in the earliest possible effective date for their benefits. But as soon as they filed the form declaring their intent, they had only 365 days to complete their claim. And for those who did so last summer, that's the looming deadline. Veterans or survivors who formally declared their intent to file a PACT Act claim by August 14th, 2023, may still qualify to receive the maximum backdated benefits, also referred to as retroactive benefits. To receive compensation backdated to the law's signing on August 10th, 2022, the earliest start date for a new claim, veterans and survivors had the option to formally notify the VA of their intent to file. Once they turned in the paperwork declaring their intent to file, they had 365 days to get their actual claim together. Those who declared their intent last summer still have a chance to complete their claim and receive full backdated benefits. Qualifying veterans receive disability compensation, while qualifying survivors receive dependency and indemnity compensation. Those who filed a claim in the past for a newly presumptive condition should file a supplemental claim instead of a new claim. Depending on the circumstances, people who filed in the past could get their benefits backdated further. If the VA denied a claim in the past for a condition that's now considered presumptive, the beneficiary should file a supplemental claim instead of a new claim. So I think the story here is, good if you went ahead and made an intent to file. If you did and haven't followed through completion, then the clock is ticking here. So get those in, and time's ticking. So get those in and make sure you take advantage of this opportunity.
Thanks for the reminder, Adam. Joe, how's your coloring book going? I know you've been working on a book.
I know 4 colors now. And apparently, get this, you can mix those and it makes new colors.
What? Stop it.
I'm not joking. I'm not even playing with you right now.
How do they, are you eating any of these crayons? Or are you saving some for the rest of the?
I go through crayons at a prodigious rate.
Did you learn that by eating 2 crowns and seeing what they mixed and came out as?
No, I was eating one. It had not occurred to me, but then I sneezed and it hit the wall. And then as it drooled down the wall, the colors blended. Boom, eureka moment.
Like a
Joe-
Jackson Pollock with
Joe's so
crayons.
smart. Exactly.
Oh man. All right, alphas. If you want to check out Joe's book, it'll be in the kids section at Barnes and Noble. Thanks
your
for
hands
listening. Yes, stay sterile. Thanks for listening. You can subscribe to our podcast, our newsletter, or send us mail guest recommendations at legion.org/Tango Alpha Lima. We'll see you next week.
Or female
Next
guest
week.
recommendations.